a deposed ruler whose death is shrouded in mystery. A legion of enemies elated to see him gone. Suspicions that linger for a century and a half. And an obscure Swedish dentist driven to solve one of history's greatest mysteries. The murder of Emperor Napoleon Bonaparte.
His life shone with a brilliance that the world had never seen before, and will doubtless never see again. Goethe on Napoleon.
He was among the most charismatic figures to have ever graced the earth. France's glorious emperor, Europe's dreaded usurper. Around the world and across the decades, his loyal followers have hungered for details of his awe-inspiring life. Not even death nor the passage of time have managed to dislodge his hold over men. Göteborg, Sweden, 1955. Dentist Sten Forshufvud was one of the faithful, a man most at home in the bygone world of Napoleon. Night after night, he would adjourn to his private study, there to devour histories of the emperor in 5 different languages. One November evening, he eagerly attacked a newly published eyewitness account of Napoleon's final days. Forshufvud had always been haunted by his hero's inexplicable illness and premature death at age 51. A rebel spirit, Sten distrusted the conventional wisdom that identified cancer as the cause of death. And he could never forget the note Napoleon had scribbled to his doctor just 6 days before his death.
After my death, I want you to open my body, make a precise report on it. I charge you to overlook nothing in this examination. I bequeath to all the ruling families the horror and shame of my last moments.
Napoleon understood that he was dying, and Napoleon did not believe for a minute he was dying of natural causes.
By May of 1821, the greatest conqueror since Caesar had become a tragic lesson in humility and hubris. Exiled by the British crown to the remote island of Saint Helena, he lay wasting away, victim of an unknown and excruciating ailment. Around him stood the suspects in a mystery that would remain unsolved for 150 years. Chief Valet Louis Marchand, the devoted and vigilant servant who slept by his master's side. Count Charles Tristan de Montholon, head of the household, whose selfless dedication led Napoleon to call him the most faithful of the faithful. Dr. Francesco Antomarchi, the Corsican physician seemingly baffled by his patient's symptoms. Word of each agonized breath was sped to the nearby mansion of Governor Hudson Lowe, the emperor's despised chief jailer. For years, Lowe and Napoleon had waged psychological warfare upon each other. Across Europe, crowned heads yearned for word that their great nemesis was no more. They remembered bitterly how his armies had conquered their lands and expelled them from their thrones. As long as he lived, it could happen again.
Here was a man who was utterly and completely dangerous to them. This is someone who was called the great thief of the world, the great ogre. This is someone who even on a little island in the middle of the South Atlantic was feared and respected by people all over Europe.
At 5:49 p.m. on May 5th, 1821, the man who had ruled half the world passed into eternity.
Josephine.
At that moment, our sobs burst out all the stronger as they had been suppressed. Comte de Monthelon and all those present approached and placed a kiss on the hand that had acted so kind to all, and which death had just turned to ice. Louis Marchand.
Napoleon's grief-stricken courtiers served him faithfully in death as they had in life. Marchand waited until the customary hour of midnight before taking charge of the lifeless body. Napoleon was carried to the next room and laid on the same billiard table where he had loved to spread out maps and relive his triumphant campaigns. The imperial head was shaved to prepare for a death mask. Each member of the inner circle received one precious lock of hair, treasured keepsakes they would proudly bequeath to their descendants. Never could they imagine that those same strands of hair would one day illuminate the death of their beloved emperor. The next day saw an autopsy heavy with political implications. Any suggestion of foul play could trigger a revolution in France. Any hint of English complicity would terminate Hudson Lowe's political career. He ordered no less than 6 English doctors to witness the procedure. Yet the autopsy, performed by Dr. Antomarchi, was strangely perfunctory.
There is something very suspicious about Dr. Antomarchi. The fact is that even by the standards of his time, the autopsy he performed on Napoleon just wasn't very good. Considering how important this autopsy was, it is remarkable that he didn't do a better job. Was he covering something up?
When one of the English doctors said that they noticed a corroded stomach and therefore Napoleon died from a condition leading to cancer, they seized on that and they said it was stomach cancer. But he did not die from stomach cancer because nobody dies from a condition leading to cancer. You die from cancer.
When the doctors submitted 4 separate reports, Lowe simplified them into a single finding. The official autopsy listed cancer as the cause of death, a verdict etched in the annals of history as fact. On May 9th, a melancholy procession laid Napoleon to rest at Geranium Valley on Saint Helena. The mourners were led by Monthelon and Marchand, each the recipient of a large cash bequest from Napoleon's will. They had served the emperor well and been amply rewarded. For their daughter Malvina, Marchand would write the memoirs of his years with the immortal emperor.
Everybody else wrote a diary, had the book published, and made a lot of money. But he wrote his book for his daughter. He wanted his daughter to know exactly how he served the emperor. No money at all whatsoever, and he ordered his family never to have his diary published.
Marchand's descendants kept his diaries private until 1952, when Napoleon scholar Henri Lachouque purchased the Marchand estate. 3 years later, the memoir was published in French, the last and most detailed account of Napoleon's final days. The release of Marchand's diaries was a major event for Napoleon buffs, including 52-year-old Sten Forshufvud. Sten had long been troubled by questions surrounding the emperor's death. If Napoleon had died of cancer, Why was he not emaciated, but bloated and obese? Why were no growths or tumors found in his body? Reading the memoirs, Forshufvud began to jot down a chronology of Napoleon's symptoms. Suddenly, he had an extraordinary revelation and called out to his wife, Ulla.
You must come and look here. He showed me the book. Can you imagine? I found they were poisoning him at Saint Helena. What a crime!
A Swedish dentist had stumbled onto one of history's greatest secrets. A century and a half after the event, Sten Forshufvud was determined that not only would he solve the mystery of Napoleon's ignoble end, he would identify his killer. Autumn 1955. Working alone in his study in Göteborg, Sweden, dentist Sten Forshufvud had developed a startling theory. The great Emperor Napoleon had not died of stomach cancer as his autopsy reported. He had been murdered, and Sten was determined to prove it.
Sten Forshufvud was a wonderful, non-conforming character. He didn't follow anyone's opinion on anything. So if the history book said that Napoleon died of cancer, Sten wasn't necessarily going to believe it.
Forshufvud saw Napoleon as a fellow iconoclast, a visionary among the blind.
Sten Forshufvud was passionate about Napoleon. He loved Napoleon because he expanded the thought of fraternity, liberty, and equality for all people.
Sten had long been captivated by the enigmatic figure who transfixed the world with his glory and his menace.
Napoleon came out of nowhere, out of obscurity, to rise to command not only the greatest army, but to control the greatest country, France, and to create an empire that Europe had not seen since the time of ancient Rome.
Napoleon's gifts were legend. A magnetic presence, a brilliant mind, and masterful insight into men's deepest desires. He inspired feverish devotion, even among his foot soldiers, by forging personal connections with them.
He would come up and say, "I remember you when we fought at the Battle of Marengo. Yeah, I remember you from Austerlitz." And so all of these people felt they had a personal stake in Napoleon being emperor. This wasn't somebody miles and miles away. He was their emperor. He cared about them. And that's why they were willing and happy to die with his name on their lips.
As Napoleon's armies swept across Europe, they brought with them revolutionary ideals. For 1,000 years, hereditary kings had ruled by right of birth. Napoleon's code treated all citizens as equal under the law, a radical notion that threatened the very existence of ruling aristocracies. From Paris to Moscow, Napoleon drew the wrath of extraordinarily powerful and ruthless enemies.
During Napoleon's time, the passion of the French Revolution, the threat he posed to the monarchies of Europe, and the fact that the Bourbons wanted their throne back in France all made the environment very ripe for murder, and the main target of this was Napoleon.
He would survive 6 direct attempts on his life, and many more aborted plots. Ironically, the great freedom fighter reigned over his growing empire as an absolute dictator. When he was just 27 years old, he summoned the Pope from Rome to officiate over his coronation as emperor. He became obsessed with assuring a lasting dynasty, divorcing his beloved Josephine when she failed to provide him with an heir. Driven by lust for world conquest, he ordered a disastrous invasion of Russia.
He wanted to advance, always get forward, get the enemy, fix the enemy, defeat the enemy, and then take over the country. And in trying to do that, he did eventually overreach himself.
500,000 men followed him into the Russian winter. Less than 1 in 10 would live to see the spring. In 1814, now vulnerable to the combined powers of Europe, he abdicated and was deported to the island of Elba. Less than a year later, he escaped. Backed by only 600 of his imperial guard, he confronted thousands of French royalist troops. Unarmed, he walked to the front lines and boldly presented himself.
Soldiers, in my exile I heard your voice. I have come back in spite of all the obstacles and all the danger. If there is a soldier amongst you who wants to kill his emperor, let him do it now. Here I am.
After a frozen moment, cries of "Vive l'Empereur" filled the air. The soldiers threw down their arms, cheering wildly, kneeling to kiss Napoleon's hand. In just 3 weeks, his ranks swelled to 400,000 men. Louis XVIII and the Bourbon family fled for their lives. A terrifying ordeal they would never forget. The kings of Europe hastily joined forces to rid themselves of the great usurper. In June of 1815, Napoleon met Wellington at Waterloo and faced final defeat. Humiliated, he surrendered himself into the hands of the English. As he awaited word of his fate, he paid a wistful visit to his country estate of Malmaison. He lingered in the bedroom he had once shared with Josephine, and where she had died a year earlier.
Malmaison was Napoleon and Josephine's private home. This was where they lived as man and wife. This was where Napoleon was more homely than anywhere else on earth. And I think it must have occurred to him that as far as the army was concerned, Josephine was their luck. Josephine was their talisman that he'd thrown away, and that maybe things would have been different if he hadn't.
No one but myself was the cause of my fall. I was my own chief enemy, the engineer of my misfortunes. I wanted to embrace too much.
Napoleon had begun a downward spiral that would lead inexorably to his death. Fate seemed to have turned against him. But to Sten Forshufvud, Louis Marchand's memoirs revealed that man had lent fate a sinister hand. Forshufvud was trained as a toxicologist. Reading the diary, he recognized many symptoms of chronic arsenic poisoning. Notorious in France as the inheritance powder, arsenic is colorless, odorless, and easily disguised by food or drink.
The doctors at Saint Helena were confused because arsenic gives off approximately 30 different symptoms. The only way you can tell that Napoleon was being poisoned with arsenic is to put all the symptoms together, and they match identical to a modern list of symptoms of arsenic intoxication.
Napoleon's body could prove Sten's theory. His remains now lay under the golden dome of Les Invalides in Paris. But the French authorities would never permit an exhumation. Sten knew that arsenic traces remain in hair for centuries, and that Napoleon had often dispensed locks of his hair as presents. Yet in 1955, analyzing hair for the poison required an impossibly large sample of 5,000 strands. The task seemed hopeless. But like the emperor he so revered, Sten was not one to refuse a challenge.
Sten Forshufvud really did believe that he was fulfilling Napoleon's own wish that someone discover the cause of his death. He had said to Antimarchy, "After my death, open my stomach, find out what killed me." Well, they didn't do it then. And Forshufvud came along a century and a half later, great admirer of Napoleon, and he said, "I feel that Napoleon is telling me you do it," and he was going to do it.
Had the great Napoleon been murdered with arsenic? Sten Forshufvud was a believer, but knowing the truth and proving it are two very different things. November 1959 found Sten at the library in downtown Göteborg, engrossed in the latest issue of Analytical Chemistry. An article by Hamilton Smith, chairman of the University of Glasgow Department of Forensic Medicine, described a new method for testing arsenic content from a single strand of hair. Galvanized, Sten immediately embarked on a search for surviving locks of Napoleon's hair. He and his wife Ulla traveled to Paris. While he attempted to contact Napoleonic scholars, she enjoyed the sights of the city. He left repeated messages for Prince Napoleon, a descendant of the emperor's brother, and one man who could surely point the way to some of the precious hair. Prince Napoleon never responded. French historians, loath to see their conventional views disturbed, were equally cool to Sten's appeals for help. After a week cooped up in his hotel room, Sten had no hairs and no prospects. On the verge of giving up, he finally tracked down Commander Henri Lachouc, the scholar who had published Louis Marchand's memoirs. In this townhouse, Sten explained his quest for Napoleon's hair, and Lachouc startled him by replying, "I have some of the emperor's hair right here." Lachouc solemnly produced Marchand's reliquaire, the box containing his mementos of Saint Helena.
Lachouc turned to me and said, "S'il vous plaît, madame." And Sten took a tweezer from his pocket, which he had brought. He has always been an optimist, and he gave it to me. And with the tweezer, I carefully picked a couple of hairs. Oh, we were excited. We were very happy. We were like children. We went away hand by hand.
Sten dispatched the single strand to Hamilton Smith in Glasgow, taking care not to reveal the hair's origin. Smith submitted it to neutron radiation bombardment at the Harwell Atomic Research Center outside London, the same laboratory that had developed the A-bomb for England. The sample was then returned to Glasgow, where a special liquid Geiger counter measured arsenic content. After waiting 19 days, Sten finally received a letter from Smith with the results. The hair contained 13 times the amount of arsenic normally found in human hair. Sten calmly presented his new evidence to French scholars. They denounced his theory as outrageous and scorned him as an amateur in over his head.
Then that moment the French blockade started. Everybody refused to cooperate with him. Nobody would give him any additional hairs, and nobody would do anything to facilitate his investigation.
Sten reasoned that the proud and nationalistic French were reaching the same conclusion his own research indicated. If Napoleon had indeed been systematically poisoned during his years in exile, only someone with regular, intimate access to the emperor could have accomplished the deed. Perhaps even a fellow Frenchman. To prove the truth, Sten needed more evidence. He needed more hairs. Turning to Marchand's diaries, he combed the past for its hidden clues. By 1815, the royal powers of Europe had seen Napoleon rise from the ashes and vowed never to let it happen again. After Waterloo, they condemned him to the most isolated spot they controlled on Earth, a volcanic cage in the South Atlantic, the island of Saint Helena.
It took weeks by ship simply to get there from England. And once you were there, you would find a small, rocky island, an area that is 1,000 miles from nowhere.
In October 1815, Napoleon and his small entourage arrived at the place he came to call this awful rock. The British directed him to live in Longwood House, a dilapidated residence buffeted by swirling winds and inhabited by scores of scurrying rats. His retinue consisted primarily of those with nowhere else to go, a motley bunch who professed absolute loyalty to their chief. As always, valet Louis Marchand stood faithfully by his side.
From the time of being a teenager on, he knew nothing but service to Napoleon, and the most intimate kind of service. He was with him all the time. He was his watchdog as well as his valet. He slept outside his room. He was always in attendance on him.
Fellow Corsican Franceschi Cipriani kept his eyes trained on the emperor. Cipriani had grown up with Napoleon and served as his bodyguard and secret agent. The old friend spoke a Corsican dialect unknown to anyone else on the island. A handful of officers pledged allegiance to the deposed emperor. Count Charles Tristan de Montholon was a rarity, an aristocrat who had joined with the revolutionary Napoleon.
When Napoleon was being sent to Saint Helena, Montholon volunteered energetically, "Please let me go with you on Saint Helena." Now, Montholon was a playboy. Montholon was a spendthrift. At one time during the Restoration period in 1814, he had misappropriated a very large sum of money to himself.
With Montholon came his wife, Albine Montholon, a coquettish divorcee whose amorous adventures were periodically curtailed by her habit of easily becoming pregnant.
Albine Montholon, the wife of Count Montholon, had a reputation of being a loose woman, a harlot, a whore. A lot of this came from the fact that her previous two marriages had ended because of adultery.
This undistinguished band formed a royal court in exile. Possessing no real power, they occupied themselves with petty squabbles and palace intrigue. Count Montholon won the dubious honor of supervising the imperial household at Longwood House.
Longwood House was a damp, rat-infested, unpleasant place to live, and it symbolized just how far Napoleon had fallen from the gorgeous palaces that he once lived in.
Arsenic was shipped in to eliminate the rats, but thanks to fears of their smelly corpses, the deadly powder was never used on the rodents. Yet, if Sten's theory proved true, someone on Saint Helena was planning to use that same poison on Napoleon himself. Sten decided he had to go public. When he and his colleagues took the risky step of publishing preliminary findings, the scientific community argued that the arsenic in Napoleon's hair must have come from an accidental environmental source, perhaps his wallpaper, or the ground in which he had been buried.
Sten was angry, and most of all he thought, oh, people are so stupid. They couldn't believe, he couldn't understand what he understood.
Despite the negative response, Sten's articles served their purpose. They attracted the attention of others around the world with Napoleon hairs in their possession. Dame Mabel Brooks, a descendant of Napoleon's neighbor on Saint Helena, read of Sten's work in Australia. She searched her dusty attic and uncovered the first of many hairs that would make the journey to Glasgow for testing. Working from his home in Gothenburg, Sten eventually tracked down dozens more authenticated hairs, collecting them from New York, from Paris, from Moscow. The arsenic levels reached up to 51.2 parts per million, 100 times the normal amount. The hairs showed peaks and valleys, confirming that the poisoning must have been deliberate. And all the hairs contained the identical genetic marker, proving that they had come from a single individual. As Forshufvud neared the end of his quest to prove arsenic poisoning, he turned his attention to exposing the murderer. Sten's suspicion fell first on Governor Hudson Lowe, the man Napoleon loved to hate.
Napoleon did not want to admit that he was a prisoner. When Lowe insisted that Napoleon had to show himself twice a day, Napoleon locked himself in Longwood House and threatened to shoot the first man that came through the door.
Lowe retaliated by making life miserable for the fallen ruler. He enforced humiliating restrictions, withholding all mail addressed to the title Emperor.
Me when I'm talking to you.
Napoleon struck back with petty rebellions of his own, all of them certain to enrage the governor.
Where are you going?
Napoleon presented a brave front to his enemies, but confided to friends that he felt as though he was being punished by the gods. Over 6 long years of exile, he was haunted by his lost glory.
Napoleon saw himself chained to a rock and gnawed at by his own greatness for the rest of his life, the memory of what was and what will never be again.
Though he felt like a helpless prisoner, his jailers still considered him the most dangerous man on earth. England devoted 5,000 soldiers and a flotilla of ships to secure his island cage. Napoleon desperately missed his son from his second marriage and despaired of ever seeing him again. His happiest days on the island were spent in the company of a 14-year-old English tomboy named Betsy Balcom. They teased each other mercilessly and delighted in playing games together. Foreign agents kept their governments informed of Napoleon's every move, even filing dispatches about Betsy. They duly reported home on the jealousies provoked in his inner circle when Madame de Montholon triumphed over her rivals and climbed into the imperial bed. One day, Napoleon came upon Albine reading the history of Madame de Brinvilliers, the true account of a gentle French lady who in the 1670s poisoned her husband, children, lover, father, and both brothers with arsenic. Napoleon knew of the famed case and remarked that poison is a coward's weapon. The affair was not destined to last. Albine, true to form, became pregnant and returned to France to have her baby, a girl who bore a striking resemblance to the emperor. Napoleon, who had come to rely on the companionship of her husband, was secretly relieved when Count Montholon chose to remain in his service. Each year brought painful farewells and increasing isolation. When Betsy Balcom's father, William, refused to spy on Napoleon for Lowe, the governor ordered the entire Balcom family back to England. Betsy and her famed playmate shared an emotional parting.
Betsy Balcom cried uncontrollably. She was emotional, she was extremely unhappy, but Napoleon felt for her. And he took out his hanky and he said, "Betsy, don't cry." And he says, "Keep my hanky as a souvenir." And in fact, he had called over Santini, his butler, who cut a mesh of his hair, and he said, "Here's a mesh of my hair so you can remember me by it."
Betsy Balcom's hair sample eventually found its way into the eager hands of Sten Forshufvud. The period recorded by Betsy's hair, late 1817, was the beginning of Napoleon's serious illness. Bedridden, he endured chills, vomiting, delirium. A series of doctors found themselves perplexed by his symptoms. Dr. Antomarchi, the man who would one day perform Napoleon's autopsy, seemed as puzzled as his colleagues.
The idea of giving him arsenic was to break down his health, to make him look like he's deteriorating on a regular basis. So when he got ill and he would die, there would not be a revolution in France.
At times, Napoleon improved, only to fall ill again. His boyhood friend and bodyguard, Franceschi Cipriani, kept an ever-vigilant watch over him. Officially a servant, Cipriani was actually the emperor's most trusted confidant, and his last link to a vanishing past.
And then one day, Cipriani got extremely sick. He had been in perfect health. 2 days later, he dies. He is immediately buried. Napoleon's suspicious. You don't just up and die that quickly without any warning. And so Napoleon says, "Let's have an autopsy. I want an autopsy of Cipriani." So they go to dig up Cipriani's body, and lo and behold, it's missing. With Cipriani gone, Napoleon has lost the one person he could truly trust, a fellow Corsican who was in charge of the food and drink, among other things. Now, Cipriani is not there to protect Napoleon.
Napoleon laid Cipriani's death and disappearance squarely at the door of Hudson Lowe. And he had no doubt that Lowe, acting for his British masters, was slowly poisoning him.
His hatred for the British meant that he used everything, including his illness, as a weapon against them. He wouldn't see British doctors because he said, "Oh, they're trying to poison me." And this, I think, blinded him to the fact that there was a plot going on, and it was far closer to home.
Nearly 10 years after opening Marchand's diary, Sten Forshufvud felt sure he was closing in on Napoleon's murderer. Advances in arsenic testing technology gave him the final piece in the puzzle. By the early 1960s, a strand of hair could be tested in sections. Each 5mm piece contained the record of 15 days in a person's life. Hair shaved from the scalp on a known day, like the day after Napoleon's death, thus provided an extraordinarily detailed chronicle of arsenic intake. By Sten's calculations, between September 1820 and April 1821, Napoleon had been poisoned 40 separate times. For 5 long months, he struggled valiantly against the enemy that was silently devouring him. Confused and delirious, he hurled his will into the fire and spent the next nights feverishly scribbling a new one. Throughout the ordeal, Marchand and Montholon attended him round the clock. They were, said a grateful Napoleon, like sons to him. Sten's meticulous research had narrowed down his suspects to a precious few. Governor Hudson Lowe, had controlled the island and was eager for Napoleon to die as soon as possible. Count de Montholon had given up his playboy lifestyle to join the emperor in a long exile. Dr. Antomarchi had reported to Lowe and then botched the autopsy. And valet Louis Marchand had given his life in service without ever asking any reward. After years of searching, Sten believed he had finally uncovered the killer. The man with enough access to his victim to inflict 40 separate doses of poison. The man who supervised the imperial household and held the keys to Napoleon's private wine stock. The man who received over 2 million francs from Napoleon's will. And the man who may have harbored a uniquely personal motive for revenge. Count Charles Tristan de Montholon. During Napoleon's first exile to Elba, Montholon had renounced the revolution and pledged his loyalty to the Bourbon regime. They rewarded him by paying off his gambling debts.
We believe that the Count de Montholon was an agent of the Comte d'Artois and working against Napoleon. The Bourbons were frightened to death that he might return. The Bourbons called him in French le revenant. Le revenant means the person who comes back again. They shipped him off to exile once at the Elbe, and he returned. And the Bourbons had to flee for their lives because Napoleon took over the throne again. This time the Bourbons said, we're not making the same mistake. We're going to get somebody out there who will poison him and he won't come back to France.
Although most modern scholars now accept Sten's theory, Montholon's contemporaries never suspected him. The Count squandered the fortune left him by Napoleon, only to be rescued once again by the Bourbons. He would spend the rest of his life scheming to gain the favor of whatever regime held power. Had the mighty emperor perished at the hands of his closest chosen companion after a lifetime of escaping death from his sworn enemies? Brilliant at manipulating the passions of others, was he ultimately felled by flattery and clever deception? In 1840, French King Louis-Philippe responded to rising Bonapartist sentiment by agreeing to Napoleon's final wish, that his remains lie among the French people he so loved. "19 years after his death, Napoleon's body was exhumed from Saint Helena for reburial in Paris. Louis Marchand, then 49 years old, was there with his daughter Malvina. For her, he would recount his long-ago days with the emperor in a memoir, a historical time bomb destined to explode in the hands of Sten Forshufvud.
They finally opened the casket, and there was Napoleon, like he was sleeping. No deterioration of his body whatsoever. They actually touched the skin on his face, and it was still soft. And he looked at peace. People thought it was some kind of a miracle, but it wasn't a miracle, because where arsenic can kill, arsenic can also preserve tissue.
France's greatest national hero lies in splendor today, beneath the majestic dome of Les Invalides. 178 years after his death, an exhumation would likely still reveal the perfectly preserved body of the man who once ruled half the globe. He had gained the world, but lost his own soul.
Napoleon had had tremendous power, and now he had none. He had had the loyalty of millions of people, and now he was surrounded by people he couldn't trust. He had given up the love that he had for Josephine to seek power, and now at the end of his life, he didn't even have that. He was left with nothing.
But Napoleon had left his imprint on history and inspired Sten Forshufvud to do the same. The stubborn dentist from Göteborg had fulfilled the emperor's dying wish and avenged history's unjust verdict.
He was a scientist, and he wanted to reveal the truth. He did it, and he worked very hard for it, and I'm still very proud of him.
We should endeavor to do something so that we may say that we have not lived in vain, that we may leave some imprints on the sands of time.